Okay, we got an interesting clip here today, which is basically Jordan Peterson talking about the dichotomy between the brain and the body as proposed by the Enlightenment, and how the actual nervous system actually works, and how really we have to look at being. So I think it's very an interesting lecture that he notes, a little clip from a lecture of his. And he does quickly refer to Freud. So I think it's interesting to see his ideas on Freud and also his ideas on the possibility of having a dichotomy between the body and the mind. So let's pop in and take a look.
You can only see a very narrow chunk of the electromagnetic spectrum, roughly that chunk that enables you to see by sunlight and to detect ripe fruit and that sort of thing. So it's very evolutionarily determined. And then the same thing is the case with your nervous system. And I put the first picture there of this is the central nervous system that controls voluntary movement, for example. I put it there because people like to think that their brain is in their head, but it's a stupid way of thinking about it as far as I'm concerned, because you have an awful lot of neurological tissue distributed through your body. And like your autonomic nervous system, if I remember correctly, which is mostly distributed through your body, has more neurons in it than your central nervous system. And so you aren't a brain in a body. You know, your brain is really distributed through your whole body.
Okay, some very good points that Jordan Peterson says here. I think the first interesting thing he's noted that we perceive a very small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So think in terms of a spectrum that's, say, a meter long, and that what we perceive is maybe a couple of millimeters. So what he's basically saying is we're not getting in that much data. A lot of stuff is happening, like right now we're sitting here, phone calls are whizzing through our bodies, internet, TV signals and videos are whizzing through our bodies. Cosmic rays are going through our bodies. There's a lot happening, but we're not aware of it. And I think he's setting that up in his argument here that humans are not very aware of many things that are actually happening. The second thing he says here, he gives a picture of the nervous system. I thought it was very useful when I was a kid. In my teens, I used to read my father's books in psychology, and those textbooks always had big, full-page pictures of, central nervous systems, basically. And it's an integral part of psychology to understand the nervous system as an aspect of the mind. And a very good point that Jordan Peterson is making here is simply that don't think that you're a brain in a head. Your brain is distributed all over your body via the nervous system. It's a very important point. Let's see where he takes it from here.
It's the soul body, brain body, mind body dichotomy, which I think is the same dichotomy. And the problem with that is that it's easy to think of thought as something that's abstracted away from the body. And I think that was an Enlightenment idea, that just like the soul shouldn't be contaminated by the demands of the body if you were going to be pure spiritually, so your thought shouldn't be contaminated by your subjectivity and your emotions and your motivations and all of that. Your abstractions should be independent of your subjectivity. Rationality and emotion are construed in that manner as enemies. That the purpose of rationality is to dispense with the irrationality of emotion and motivation. And that's Freud's idea of the properly functioning ego is something like that too, because the id is this place of compulsion and drive, and the ego has to basically suppress that in the service of the superego. There's no idea of integration really in Freud.
Now here I have to disagree with Jordan Peterson. I like Jordan Peterson and makes a lot of interesting points, but I don't think it's fair to say that there's no focus on integration in Freud, because, okay, first of all, what Freud does, he does split the idea of you got the ego, and then you got the superego, which is there to repress anything that gets in the way, that's not acceptable. So whatever society is, you're trying to fit into society, so your superego will repress what's called the id, which is your instinctual self. So you got the id, the instinctual self, you got the ego, and you got the superego. But there is also the ego ideal, or the ideal ego, which is something to aspire to. That's also in Freud, and Freud does strongly focus upon people trying to move forward with their lives. Where he talks about there's no integration in psychoanalysis and in Freud is basically that psychoanalysis does not believe you can ever be full, does not believe that you can ever be whole, does not ever believe that you can be it does not believe you can be an integrated person. So he's right in that doesn't believe that you can be an integrated person, but does believe that you can work towards having a better integration. So you can never be fully integrated, but you can have a better attempt at integration, and that is called a successful resolution of the Oedipus complex. And of course we could go into detail then whether Oedipus complex is real or not, and that gets very deep, but I think it's unfair to say that there's no integration in Freud, but definitely Freud doesn't believe in a kind of whole state. He believes in a fractured human being. That's the core essence of all psychoanalysis.
I don't want to be rough on Freud, and I think part of the reason that he thought that way is because the patients he had were precisely those who weren't very well integrated because of their pathological past, and so they didn't know how to get those subsystems up into the overarching game, and so their only alternative was something like suppression or repression. Because if you don't know how to be aggressive in a sophisticated way, you're still going to be aggressive, but you're going to have to inhibit it, control yourself, because you can't just be aggressive around people. It just won't go well for you.
So here Jordan Peterson makes a good point towards the end of this little section, in the sense that he says that if you don't know how to control your feelings and your aggressive instincts, you're going to have a hard job if you are being aggressive around people, that it won't go well for you. And that obviously if a person is badly integrated, they're going to have neurotic symptoms. Either going to be acting out, or from a Freudian perspective, they're going to be heavily repressed. And so I agree with that, but he links it back to the idea that in the Victorian era, the reason why Freud came up with his theories was that he was dealing with these very neurotic people. He's also dealing with a lot of hysteric people. Hysteric is a person who, rather than worrying and thinking about stuff, they actually act out. It was very common for women to have fainting and other hysterical symptoms back those days. And it was a very repressive society. So he is right that the people at that time were very repressed, and that was a particular bunch of people. But I would kind of argue against the idea that that was unusual. Yeah, people might be a bit more repressed, or people definitely were more repressed then, but that's not enough of an explanation in my opinion.
You can't do it in a sophisticated way. You're going to repress it, or you're going to get in trouble. Those are the options. So, okay, but if you start thinking about the brain, the nervous system, as part of the body, as an inseparable part, well then the function of thinking starts to become something different. It's not so much the objective, abstract representation of the world, which is kind of what you're pursuing if you're a scientist. It's more like conceptualization of and practice of the proper way of being in the world. And I think that's what you're more interested in anyways. I don't see how you can't be, since you're a living thing.
Okay, so I think it's been an interesting lecture by Jordan Peterson. So we see he's gone full circle from talking about integration, that we're not as a skull in a box. He talks about the Enlightenment era. He mentions Freud and this idea of a dichotomy, which obviously he doesn't believe in, and that we should really focus upon being, because we're here in the human body. That's the most important thing. And what I feel is interesting in that, of course, is that it goes back to this other idea of integration, which I tend to agree with. I tend to agree that we should not divide the body from the mind, or have this dichotomy of good and bad and so on. We are a person, we are a being, and existentialism, being is the nature of life, is all about being and understanding being. So I think it's very interesting, the comments that he's making about that we really don't have much of an awareness. And I think this would really open up to a very interesting stream of thought, as it were, regarding psychoanalysis and repression and why it is that we are living in the world the way it is and how we perceive the world. Why is it that we don't perceive much of the world? And what's happening with repression? So I think it's an interesting concept to think about. And I suppose where I agree with Jordan Peterson is that we are not just a skull in a box. Our nervous system is very important. We are a being, and beingness, the existential focus is very, very important. But where I disagree with Jordan Peterson is this inherent belief or implicit belief that he appears to have that anybody can be integrated in the first place. I don't actually agree with integration. I don't believe that humans are integrated. And if we understand Freud and what Freud was really talking about, Freud is basically saying that in civilization we have to fit in, and that there is an emotional content. And there's really, if you look at his works on oppression, there's three major things which are repressed. One is aggressivity, the other is sexuality, which doesn't fit in with society, and the third thing are thoughts which are contrary to society. So the first two will basically be covered under the instinct of fight or flight, that you either want to punch somebody's lights out or you want to run away. That's the aggressive instinct. But there's also the eros or the erotic instinct, which is the desire to have sex with somebody. So we tend to have a desire for sex, which is very often inappropriate because a sex drive has no morality to it. And we tend to have a strong desire to hurt people or hit people, or sometimes just to run away from people. So aggressivity is an issue, sexuality is an issue, but also we have a structured society where we want to fit into society. And, if you think of it this way, that we are related to the primates, and like primates, like apes, social structure and our social placing in society is very important. And so we tend to repress in order to fit in with society. And we don't want to step out, we don't want to be persecuted, basically, or rejected, like thrown out of society altogether, cancelled, as it were. So in order to do that, we repress. And I don't see a way around that. I don't see how you can integrate to such a degree that you would have no aggressive side, that you would have no sexual side, or that you have thoughts, like this thing of a lot of self-censorship takes place, whereby we think something, but we don't want to say it because we'll feel that will be inappropriate, that will be censored in some way. So I don't see how you can integrate in such a way to get around these obvious issues of human life. And in that sense, I disagree with him. And I do think his take on Freud is a little bit off, but I do appreciate his focus on going away from an Enlightenment dichotomy and moving more towards an existential beingness, which I do think is good. I just thought it was an interesting video, and it's interesting to think about these ideas. Please like and subscribe to the video if you like it, and I'll talk to you next time.